Now that the sun has come back, I hope that you will have a few minutes today to walk around the campus and, as President Gutman said, look at some of the new buildings, the new music building, the new Annenberg Public Policy Center, some of the plantings of new trees all over College Green, which shows that we believe in our future. One of the large tornadoes that swept through Philadelphia last June knocked down some of the old elms that I know you remember from in front of College Hall. One of them was 112 years old. Wow. And so we're planting some new ones so that in another 112 years, they will be there and as large and as beautiful as the ones that were knocked down. This panel is called Penn Then and Now, and I have several wonderful faculty and staff members here who are going to reflect on their careers at Penn. Before I introduce them and they begin to talk, let me just say two things. I came to Penn in 1974 at a time when there were very, very few women on the faculty. Also, diversity meant something different. I remember in my first classes, diversity meant there were 2 French-Canadian hockey players in the group, and that was about it. But you know, Penn has changed an enormous amount since that time, and this is what our panel is going to reflect upon. You have their bios in your program, but I want to introduce in sort of reverse order here, because that is the way in which they're going to talk. Jackie Wade, who is the former head of Afro-American Studies and faculty member at the School of Social Work. Bob Schoenberg, director of Penn LGBT Center. Tina Pierce-Fragoso, who's one of our regional admission directors. Grace Cow, who is associate professor of sociology and education in Asian American studies. And then Ann Farnsworth-Alvear, who is a associate professor of history and director of Latin American and Latino studies. Now, what we're going to do is the following. I'm going to ask 2 questions. The first one being, I've asked each one of them to think about one personally meaningful cultural transformation that they have seen at Penn while they've been here, and then tell us how and why it happened. And so you'll get a little bit of sense from different perspectives what has changed at Penn. And after we have just one other brief exchange, we're going to open it up for questions, because what we want to do is to engage in dialogue with you. So, Jackie, would you like to start?
Thank you. It's really my pleasure to be here. And excuse my voice, I'm, suffering still from bronchitis. So if I get a little gravelly, it's not because I'm trying to be sexy. It's just because I'm being gravelly. I feel like I have the distinction of being one of the oldest heads up here along with Bob Schoenberg. I first came to Penn in 1970 as a graduate school in the School of Social Work, graduate student in the School of Social Work, and was a part of some student effort as we organized as the charter chapter of the student chapter of the National Association of Black Social Work Students that activated not only for some changes, we were one of the first student groups to call the question on Penn's encroachment of the Black community in West Philadelphia as it sought to expand its environment and so forth. And also, I like to think helping to be a part of the solution of Penn's need to be more inclusive, more equitable. Later on, I became a staff member and faculty member at Penn. One of my fondest and most proudest involvements was helping to establish the Greenfield Multicultural Center, working with some very wonderful now alums, Mark Rodriguez and others for that, as well as strengthening the W.E.B. Du Bois House, College House, and so forth. And more importantly, yes, and more importantly, working in the Division of Student Life to try to engage all students, particularly non-minority students, to be very committed to this thing we call equity, this thing we call inclusion of others, and so forth in our community, and establishing programs. We had retreats, Bob and I and others were very much involved in mandating for student leaders that we say you really can't be an effective student leader unless you have some sense of your organizational role on this campus to help Penn become a truly equitable and inclusive community. And while we had our little bumps and grinds along the way in that engagement process, we at least laid the groundwork, I think, for student involvement in this effort, as well as faculty and staff. So I want to congratulate Penn for having this conference, and I want to encourage that it be something yearly. I'll have more to say later, but everybody knows I am not one to mince words, but I'll be nice today.
Well, when I was asked to think about one thing that's changed, especially for the community with which I work most closely, since I started in 1982, the word that came to mind was everything. For one thing, I have to say, it would have been inconceivable to imagine then the president of the university speaking to a group of alumni about diversity and being so inclusive of LGBT people. It's not only what Dr. Gutman had to say today, but the fact that she was here and that she's so supportive of diversity is one very significant change. But I just noted down a few things in the category under everything so that I could come up with one thing but still have several sub-points. So among the things that have changed most notably, when I first started in 1982, many, if not most, LGBT students, and then they were really called gay students in a comprehensive way, were closeted and were frightened. And the reason that I was hired was because of a rather nasty incident of violence directed at a gay student on campus. Now, students come to campus, and partly with the encouragement of the admissions office, they've been out since they were 12 or 13. Their parents know, their parents bring them to campus. This is not true of all students, but a very large number of students are very comfortable, very knowledgeable about, and very comfortable with who they are. At that time, there were certain places on campus which were not safe for gay and lesbian students, fraternities and sororities, for one. Now, many, if not most, fraternities and sororities have out lesbian and gay members. The lesbian, gay binary was very much in place then. Now the community is more differentiated. We have a larger number of students who identify as bisexual and a growing number of students who identify as transgender, somewhere on the transgender spectrum. And now, as of August 15th, have the benefit of a health insurance, comprehensive health insurance policy that incorporates the needs of transgender students, including counseling, hormones, and eventually, if they wish, gender confirmation surgery. In 1982, there was one student club. Now we have more than 20 LGBTQ student organizations on the Penn campus, both cross-campus and school-specific organizations. Then the LGBT community was mostly white. Now the LGBT community is much more diverse in terms of race and ethnicity, and is much richer for that diversity. And finally, there were fairly frequent incidents of bias of one form or another reported to me in the early days of my employment. Now I'm happy to say, although we still have some advocacy issues, which I can talk about later, there are very few incidents of bias reported, and when they are reported, they're fairly mild incidents of bias. But I would be remiss, as Dr. Gutman started out her remarks this morning, not to mention what happened at Rutgers this past week.
Absolutely.
We can't be self-satisfied. We can't rest on our laurels, because what happened to that young man at Rutgers could happen anywhere, really. The fact that the student who became his roommate knew as early as August and started emailing people and saying, oh my God, what am I going to do? My roommate is gay. That he taped the roommate in sexual activities with another man, and then promulgated that videotape and belittled and harassed that young man to the point that he felt apparently there was nothing else he could do besides jump off of the George Washington Bridge and take his own life, is something that needs to be paid attention to, because it could happen anywhere. So although we have a lot to be proud of, it's obvious that we also need to take heed and be very, very caring for ourselves and for each other.
Good morning. I'm very happy to be a part of this distinguished panel today, especially since my career at Penn has only been about a year. I have been a part of the Native community, the local Native community, and worked with the Native population on campus for a number of years. So I do have a view of how things have changed over a longer period of time. The biggest thing that's happened is there are Native students on campus. There are 25 Native students that came in as the freshman class this year. That number has actually doubled the number of Native students on campus. And I'm also happy to say that it doesn't include the number of graduate students, the LPS, the medical school, and all of those students. We have a very large number of Native students on campus right now. Some of that has come from the recruitment strategies. We're able to actually go into the urban reservation, the rural tribal communities. We're looking at making connections with the communities themselves rather than just individuals, so we're developing partnerships. We're working really closely with the Choctaw Nation right now, thinking about how to help their students and how to bring them here and be responsible for those students, not just for recruiting and yielding them, but to actually see them through graduation and making sure that while they're here as students, that they actually don't have to give up their strong ties to their cultural communities. So I'm really excited about those changes. One of the biggest changes I've seen is in the past, Native people have been here since the university was founded. There have been a number of students trickling in over those couple of hundred years. But usually we're the people that are being studied. For the first time, I feel like Native students are actually able to come and do the studying, and not just in fields of business and nursing and things like that. We're actually able to study our own communities and to make an impact and build careers that are actually going to help us to help our own communities. Six Directions is here on campus. They've been able to put on the first powwow. The prior powwow was about a decade earlier, so there's a huge gap even on being able to put on something as simple as a powwow. In a lot of tribal communities, a powwow is a way for us to educate the local community and at the same time get together with our family, to get together with other tribal communities. So having a powwow here in April was a really big deal, and it took a lot of efforts, and it really shows that there is some support here on campus and that there are connections with the local community. All of this is possible, I think, because the alumni haven't given up on Penn being a diverse community for Native people as well. Ann Dappis has done extraordinary work in her years since she's been here. She comes back and she mentors the students. She's responsible for me sitting here today, making sure that the faculty and the staff are diverse as well. There's a change, too, that I've seen in the past couple of years. There were students that were actually able to repatriate, to take home, to bring home cultural remains and ceremonial items from the Penn Museum as part of their coursework, which I think is extraordinary. And I know from personal experience that when I was an undergraduate, that was not possible. And so I'm really excited that while we're still somewhat of an invisible population, because the numbers need to continue to grow, there is a support on campus, there is an acknowledgement that we're here and that we have something to contribute. And I'm very proud to be a part of that.
Thank you all for coming. I do want to slightly correct Lynn, who actually demoted me. I'm a professor of sociology. I was promoted a couple of years ago. But I love Penn because I've had my entire academic career here. I started as an assistant professor, went to associate, and then just became full recently. So in my time here, what I've witnessed are a few things. Thank you. Thank you. One of the things that I want to speak from the point of view of a faculty member. 13 years ago, we established the Asian American Studies program, which was largely due to student activism over many, many years. And I want to say that it actually started in the 80s from people who are probably some of whom are in the room right now. So it took 30 years almost for a U.S. diversity requirement to occur, but we did it finally. President Gutman also mentioned the Pan-Asian American Community House, which was established 10 years ago. I remember I was at the rally where we were pushing President Roden at the time, and she really came through, so that's wonderful. The thing that I'm most impressed with was something that happened a few years ago, which is we actually passed in the School of Arts and Sciences a U.S. cultural diversity requirement. This was a really big deal. Thank you. A really, really big deal, and impacts everyone in this room and all of us in the audience, to be certain. And again, that's something that happened so long ago with former students, and our alumni who've been very active in these efforts also helped to push the faculty. But really a driving force were the student groups on campus, and I can't say that strongly enough. So for me, those are three things that I've witnessed and seen them grow over the years, and it's been really wonderful. And I encourage the alumni who are here, who were students, to not give up on Penn, so to speak. Some of you were very active 10, 20, 30 years ago, pushing for some of these efforts. You didn't see it happen, and that might be a little bit discouraging and maybe sort of give you a bitter taste in your mouth, so to speak. But I want to encourage you to keep pushing for these things, because there are many of us who continue to work, and these are systemic efforts, really not embedded in a particular individual or even a single organization. So that's all I want to say.
I tried to be good and pick only one thing. And I thought about it, and if I had to pick only one thing that made for increased cultural visibility for Latinos at Penn since I arrived in 1993, and it was only one thing, it would be the growth and development of the student group Onda Latina, which has been, I think, a real leading light. They're a dance group. They are very visible to undergraduates, not so much to staff, faculty, and administration. But I wanted to put them in context. 14 years ago, when the students who wanted to organize Onda Latina around salsa, but also around other rhythms, were doing it, they were able to do it in part. They needed signatures from faculty, so they were able to do it in part because of faculty who were at that time organizing what is now a major in the college, and Latin American Latino Studies major, which exists also and is important. I would just prioritize the salsa group. But they were able to organize the dance group in part because faculty were there and were culturally engaged with creating a curriculum, which now does exist. And now, when they meet for Onda and are able to do things with Onda, they do it in the context of La Casa Latina, which is a cultural center housed literally between Macu and Patch, in the Arch Building, between the cultural center that focuses on African American culture and the one that focuses on the Pan-Asian community. So La Casa Latina is in the middle there, and now Onda is part of that. But when that student group began, they didn't have Casa Latina, and they were there at the rallies that led to Casa Latina. So if I were going to highlight the existence of a curricular initiative, Latin American Latino Studies, and the presence of a student-focused cultural center, La Casa Latina, one way to do both would be to point to the ongoing presence of this wonderful dance group, which has prioritized the visibility of Afro-Latino rhythms and has, for successive generations of students, been, I know, a place of real fun and welcoming. So I don't know if they performed, they might not have, but get on their mailing list so you can come back.
We want to have time for your questions, but I'm going to let the panel talk just very briefly more and have anyone who wants to mention something that they think they would really like to see happen for change at Penn to jump in, and maybe we'll talk for 5 more minutes and then we'll open things up to the audience. Okay. So any short comments on what any of you would like to see change at Penn?
Well, I want to follow up on, I didn't quite catch your name, but my faculty colleague at Rutgers Camden, thank you so much for that. I really think the single biggest challenge is diversity of faculty. If you look at our numbers, it's moved very, very slowly, and I don't think a good excuse is that while Penn isn't doing so poorly, that we're sort of in the middle of the pack. I don't think the middle is good enough. I think we should be a leader in this front. I think a few things we really have to push, and I mean we, students, alumni, and faculty. It's not just the numbers, but it's the numbers of people who are in leadership roles. We're very fortunate to have someone like Amy Gutman who believes in these things, hosts dinners for minority faculty and so forth. But I would really urge people at universities all over the country to think about minority professors who can be in leadership roles. And we don't have that at Penn. We don't have that at most schools. And I think that's the next step. So it's not just the leaky pipeline at the beginning, because we'll see that it's more diverse in terms of women, minorities as graduate students, and then you see it becoming less diverse as assistant professors, associate, and full. And you can't just say, well, people aren't going to graduate school. Sure they are. I have lots of minority students. Most of my students are women. Most of the full professors at Penn or other places are not women. And it's not just a cohort effect, because that hasn't really changed in 30 years if you look at the profile of full professors all over the country. So something is wrong, and it's not, we can't just say, well, it's high school or it's college. It goes beyond that. So I think for me that's the single biggest issue.
Yeah. I'd like to just add that one of the things we have to remember, that the way we came to where we are now was not without struggle. Penn didn't suddenly wake up one morning and say, oh, it's bad people, we should do better and be more inclusive and establish these programs and so forth. So I think that tells us that the struggle has to be ongoing. I think that, we laid some great groundwork. For instance, the establishment of not only these different student of color centers and initiatives, as well as academic programs and studies and so forth, but we also had places where people who are already here, who are still experiencing roadblocks and barriers and so forth in this community, can go for help and so forth. One that comes to mind is the African American Faculty Staff Resource Center, which I'm happy to have been a part of that struggle to get that established. And it was not easy. None of these programs that have come about have not come about without struggle. So I wanted to really emphasize that, all right? The other thing that I want to say in terms of going forward, I think that there are many things that can happen to help Penn build on its achievement. I mean, I'm very proud of Penn. It's one of the few universities that I've been in that I'm still not ashamed of. That I don't bow my head and say, yeah, I went, to Penn. I'm very happy about this and its ongoing achievements in this regard. One of the things that Penn might want to do, particularly in the area of increasing its faculty and staff, is to adopt what Southern colleges and universities were forced to do in their mandate to desegregate their institutions across the board was to perhaps establish a grow your own program where you make opportunities for graduate students to come and continue to develop their scholarly efforts and work with the caveat that we'll hire you when you finish at the end and continue to nourish and cherish your growth and development to the point of leadership in this academic community for the next generation of not only scholars, but chairs and leaders, academic leaders in this community as well as in the world. Finally, I want to say that one of the things I think that Penn needs to really focus on and assure itself that it's doing a great job is to also not only encourage the next generation of leaders and scholars among people of color, students of color, to go back not only to their own communities for uplift, as well as dealing with their communities here at Penn, but to also engage and challenge non-minority students, to not continue to be satisfied with being, as we used to say in the old days, part of the problem, but to continue to create opportunities for engaging them and challenging them, because they too are being groomed to be the next generation of leaders in this nation and throughout the world, as well as the next generation of scholars throughout the world, and that they too must instill in themselves a commitment to being part of the solution of what's going on in the broader community. We should not think that all is well out there. It isn't. I mean, the Rutgers incident is one horrible reminder of that. And I can tell you many, many more incidents that have involved all people that are represented on this panel. So that's what I want to see us do as we move forward.
Well, with that call to engagement, I think what we need to do is to open this up more broadly, and we can respond to your comments and questions. We have about 10 minutes. Those of you that we have microphones that are available there. Are there any questions for the panel?
Hi, my name is Imani Dawson, and I'm a member of the Wharton class of 1997. And thank you. Thanks. So my freshman year, fall 1993, all of the black freshmen, entering freshmen, got harassing calls. I lived in the Du Bois College house. We had to evacuate the building twice because we had bomb threats. And I just felt like the university never really addressed that. And as a student, it was probably the most distressing experience of my life, because before that had gone to a very small school where we were sort of in a cultural bubble. And I'm just wondering what kinds of cultural conversations and attempts at engagement, and I'm very happy to hear about the diversity requirement, because when I walked on campus, I was immediately made to feel defensive, like I didn't really belong here, even though I had to work as hard as anybody else to get in, and I had a decent academic record as a student. So I'm just wondering how, like, students coming in today, because I know that people tend to travel in their own respective cultural groups. How are they being engaged? Like, how are they interacting with each other? What's the climate like now? Because, I mean, thankfully none of us left, but it was a horrifying experience that came on the heels of the water buffalo incident in 1992 that happened before I even got here. And there was a whole big, like, national stink about that made it seem like the Penn black community was extremely divisive and radical. But then when we were sort of attacked as, like, freshmen, no one addressed it. Like, there was no national conversation about that. I don't even know if, like, there were 2 articles in the Daily Pennsylvania, and that was basically it. So, Sorry about that. I know it was like a paragraph, but I'm just wondering what's going on today with students.
That was a very difficult time. I remember it well, and there was definitely a lot of reaction and backtracking after you left. Students complained about the fact that RAs were required to plan programs for the students on their halls that pertained to diversity. There were accusations of social engineering and brainwashing, and these more conservative white students had the ear of the administration. And because it so happened that the incident you referred to took place when the then president had just been nominated to be chair of the National Endowment for the Humanities, brought a lot of attention to Penn and to that incident that it might not otherwise have had. But there was definitely a period until a certain number, especially of students, but also of staff and faculty, started to speak up and to say, there are problems here on campus, and we can't pretend because we got all that awful publicity in the early 90s that they aren't still here. And gradually over the ensuing 10 years, I think we've gotten back at least close to where we were before that incident. And, again, I credit students who said, we need to keep working on this. It didn't just all go away because we were trying to sweep it under the rug or avoid bad publicity.
I think that it has made a big difference for African American students at Penn to now engage with a campus that is not in a black-white binary anymore. They will not be here without meeting Latino kids. And my impression in my classes is that it means a lot to have, in all of my classes, I have African American kids in there who are learning Spanish, who are engaged with learning about Afro-Latino populations in other countries of the Americas. And I think it really breaks down the binary. So you might still have to deal with feeling like there are a lot of white kids here who make me feel defensive, and they are going to do that sometimes. Not all white kids are going to do this. But there are also a range of people here who are engaging in different ways with the history of the Americas, which is, obviously the United States is one among many societies which have a history of freedom, of a struggle for emancipation and for the establishment of freedmen communities. And I have found for the African American students who engage with Latin American and Latino studies on campus, that it changes their view of racial dynamics. And I think that that is new. I think that that is something that has become available as a way of thinking outside of the binary of racism, which is still with us. But I think that that alternative set of perspectives is a helpful one. And when I arrived in 93, I also arrived in 93, I don't think that was available very much. And I have a number of Latino students who live and have lived in Du Bois House and have been part of these conversations, which I think have changed the shape of it a bit.
Thank you. Do we have some more questions? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Michael Lee. I'm from the class of 2002. I guess this is a question really for, I'm the young guy in the room, but I guess this is a question for Grace first. I know the Asian American alumni community heard rumblings about the Asian American Studies program getting cuts.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to hear about that situation a little more because I only knew about the rumblings.
Right.
And also, I guess for the entire panel, what can we as minority alumni do to help keep your multicultural studies programs going? Because I really love taking Asian American studies when I was here at Penn and learning about myself when you can't really learn about it in high school. So thank you.
Good point.
Thank you so much for that comment. I won't go into the gruesome details because it'll take me an hour, but essentially we had a challenge to the budget. I was director at the time. I told our students and staff, and I said, well, I can't do this by myself. They're cutting our budget so that I won't have any staff whatsoever, so I'm resigning. I wrote this very clearly to the dean. I guess it was shocking. They wanted to talk to me some more. I said, no, it's not up for negotiation. You know, I signed on to be director to do this under these conditions. Now you've taken away, you know, staff support. I can't do it. So I have to say our students came, they talked to the president the very next day, and things moved very quickly. And UPenn was instrumental. My minority faculty members in particular, the senior minority faculty members at Penn, were all very close. Everyone was behind us immediately. DP covered us every day, front page, above the fold, every single day. So there was a petition, 1,200 people signed it. It got resolved, but it didn't get resolved on its own. And I think that's a sign for all of us that, you know, it wasn't just a faculty member, it wasn't just students, but it was everyone together. And if it hadn't been resolved that quickly, you know, it would have escalated. There was students had a long-term plan. The students are so bold that they basically went to the dean and the president and said, you must respond to our demands in 24 hours or else. And they told me this, and I said, what's the or else? And they said, well, we didn't say. We think we're going to have a rally. but with just the or else, and you know, that meant a 2 o'clock deadline. It was resolved at 1:30 the next day. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. So it's just amazing. You know, as a faculty member, I'm an employee of the university. I would never could demand something like 24 hours or else. All I can do is resign, right? So anyway, thank you all for being so supportive.
I can't relate specifically to your question about academics because unfortunately there is no LGBT studies program at Penn, though the gender and sexuality segment of the women's studies program has been beefed up a lot. But I can't underestimate in general the importance of alumni.
Absolutely.
Because first of all, you are mentors and role models for our current students, to find ways to keep our current students connected to you through the network of alumni, through career services, and to encourage you in your various organizations that you work for to continue to come to Penn and recruit Penn students and tell them that you're working in diverse workplaces and that you feel comfortable in your workplaces. And I don't want to be crass about this, but alumni support through your gifts and contributions are invaluable. The LGBT Center could not do some of the things that it does on the university budget alone. We're very, very appreciative of having alumni who have been supportive of our efforts.
And then we'll have one more question and we'll wrap it up. So, Ann.
What do I want? I want an endowed faculty chair for Latino studies. You know, what do I want? I want an endowed chair for Mexican studies and for Brazilian studies and for Latino populations in the United States. But I'll settle for one and we'll get the best person. I would also like to see particularly a program for postdoctoral presence on the campus, a person who will come and teach courses.
Absolutely.
These are programs that cost money, and I know that they will happen. I don't know which year we will have our first endowed faculty chair for Latino studies, which does not exist. We do not have that, and I know that it will happen. I don't know what year it will happen.
If I could just add to, we need Native faculty on campus. There are no Native faculty. We need a Native Studies program on campus which will benefit not only the Native students, but all the students, the whole community. And as far as the alumni support, you help us to envision what types of change are possible, because I keep hearing that change is slow and hard. And so the alumni really keep that change in our minds and help us to find ways to actually actively pursue that and to make that happen. So you're essential to the Penn experience today.
Do we have one more question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good morning, Stephanie Renee, class of Wharton class of 91. And thank you. And my question is for the entire panel, and it was inspired by Dr. Wade's statements, but I think all of you have contributed to this process. I think one of the barriers that we have when we think about having a more diverse faculty is the fact that academia is very self-serving. And the problem is that there are lots of alumni, there are lots of people who have very practical work experience in various fields that would be essential to enhancing our faculty in higher education, but there are people who have chosen not to stay in grad school for the rest of their natural-born days to get credentials that are required to be on faculty at our schools. Here in Philadelphia in particular, within the public schools, they had a complete almost meltdown in terms of music instructors. And so they started reaching out to working musicians to say, if you can come in and you can teach these programs, we'll figure out some way around the certification process for you to be able to do that. Now, these are people who have, recording credits out the wazoo. They are working musicians, and that's something that Philadelphia Public Schools did to try and get instructors in the classroom. I would love for all of the panel to talk about how we might need to look at a shifting paradigm in terms of credentialing for faculty positions so that we might encourage more alumni or more working professionals to come back and share their knowledge with young people.
Yeah, that's really what I was getting at when I talked about grow your own. I think there are many ways of doing it, and one of the problems we often have, not only at Penn, but just in the United States generally, is wanting to look like we're bringing about change while at the same time maintaining the status quo. And I think we've got to, somebody said, get out of the, think outside of the box. I mean, everybody does not have to have this lockstep, academic career to PhD and so forth. I mean, there's nothing written on the skies that says, thou shalt do it only this way. I think that there are many innovative ways, just as you were mentioning, about utilizing people with practical experiences who really are just as academically knowledgeable as the usual faculty type who's gone another process. And I think that we have to have multiple processes and really face our established modes of doing things to challenge there are other ways of doing it and still assure academic quality. That's what I think.
I think most professional schools at Penn have clinical faculty or associated faculty who come back from the field and who teach courses, both academic and practical courses. And I think that's one way to make more use of the people in the community that you're referencing.
Yeah. Penn, in fact, has a whole series of faculty tracks. Virtually every school has several different categories for part-time faculty who are professionals in their field and who come back and teach. I think that you have raised the issue of how we can use these people more effectively, how we can integrate more of them, how we can reach out beyond our campus for all of the skills in the surrounding city and in the surrounding region. But I think we have a full day planned of other panels where you can ask a great many questions, where there'll be dialogues all day long. I want to thank all of you for coming, and I want to thank the panel for being here and being willing to talk with us this morning.